Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Today, we're taking a look at the DC Multiverse Target exclusive Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. Starting off with the packaging, we've got our DC Multiverse window box. It actually says Batman of Zur-En-Arrh instead of just Batman. This is so they can specify that this particular Batman of Zur-En-Arrh comes from Batman R.I.P. and is not the space alien from the 1958 comic book. Down here, we've got the UPC for those who want it, and on the back, we have a big beautiful product shot of Batman of Zur-En-Arrh reenacting the end of the Shawshank Redemption. For packaging, I'm giving the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh 1 whole point. Moving on to presentation, and at the top of his head, Batman stands at 7¼ inches, but to the top of his ears, he stands at 7½ from the top, and this is one of the best Batman head sculpts that McFarlane has given us. Upon closer inspection, I think it might have used the Year 2 head as a template. This one, however, is a bit more cracked and dinged. Even his skin's looking a bit roughed up. Flipping it around, and we can appreciate the rich purple cape. This has got to be some of the lightest, most flexible material I have ever seen. Moving on down, and we've got the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh's pointy shoulders. We've also got his bat symbol, which on mine is a bit sloppy, and although I don't think it's accurate, I do like the stitch work. Kinda reminds me of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. That said, if they're gonna sculpt it, I do wish that they would have at least painted it. Speaking of paint, the belt could definitely use a little something. The plastic is so thin you can actually see the purple kinda bleeding through. That said, it's a pretty cool design for a belt. For a ramshackle costume made on the fly, the gauntlets are definitely Batman-like. His traditional boots, however, have been swapped out with these lace-up ones. Again, lots of really wonderful textures, and on the subject of the boots, they also have some pretty sweet treads. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh is an alternate personality buried deep within Bruce Wayne's psyche. He's a Batman who's untethered from Bruce Wayne's conscience and moral code. His gaudy, ramshackle costume is made from scraps and designed to stand out and pick a fight. I'll admit that this wasn't a costume or a story I was terribly familiar with before this action figure, but now, thanks to this figure, I kinda want to check it out. Personally, I think if a toy can do that, it's done a pretty good job. For presentation, I'm giving the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh 1 whole point. Moving on to posability, and we know what to expect. From the top, and Batman's head's on a dumbbell joint, up this much, this far down, really great tilt, and all the way around. Swivel hinge shoulders raise up 90 degrees, forward and back with a rotator cuff, bicep swivel, double jointed elbow, and McFarlane wrist balls as swivel and hinge. Shifting to the torso, and Batman has a diaphragm joint at a dumbbell waist. He can hunch over this far, which is honestly better than usual, and he can arch back that far. Little bit of tilt, twist, and shout. Below the waist, Batman has a typical McFarlane hips. They kick out this far, which honestly isn't that much, but they split this far, which is pretty good. Really good amount of twist. Double jointed knees, real missed opportunity for a boot cut, toe articulation, and McFarlane ankle balls at swivel, hinge, and pivot. Not only is the articulation in this figure good, but certain joints, like the diaphragm, seem to have more range than usual. For posability, I'm giving Batman of Zur-En-Arrh 1 whole point. Moving on to playability, and of course he comes with a trading card and a figure stand. And if you want to learn what the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh is all about, pause here. He also comes with this knife and a spike bat. The paint could be a bit clearer, but you get the idea. And hey, they at least painted the wraps. They don't call you Batman for nothing. But playability is more than just accessories, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. It's also about head swaps, but we'll get there when we get there. Starting off with some allies, and here he is with the DC Essentials, Nightwing and Red Hood. I think they scale perfectly. Here he is with a couple of Damians. One's by Mattel and one's by McFarlane. And if you're curious about how the Infinite Frontier Robin that I'm giving away would look, well, here you go. A lot of you have been asking for a head swap on these. Unfortunately, the pegs don't match, so you will have to get creative. For a couple of Robins as colorful as he is, here he is with Dick Grayson and Carrie Kelly. Copying my color scheme, I see. Also, YouTube user Tristan Peck asked about a head swap, so here you go. With some minor tweaks, I do think this figure could work as a Dick Grayson, but the Damian head is definitely too big. Of course, for my favorite Robin, here he is with Tim Drake. Here he is with a couple of Batgirls. The purple one is DC Essentials, and the gray one is DC Multiverse. For a couple of non-costume characters who care a heck of a lot about Batman, here we have Commissioner Gordon and Alfred. Commissioner Gordon is by DC Collectibles, and Alfred is by Mattel. Moving on to his super friends, and here we have the Man of Steel, Action Comics to the right, and Rebirth on his left. For my own homebrew Superman, here we have the Rebirth head on the Dark Knight Returns body. Here we have the Solar Suit from Lois and Clark. Kinda cool to see a bright, colorful Batman and a dark brew fruity Superman. And since it's handy from my last review, here he is with the DC Superman from DC Direct. Here we have the Flash, both DC Essentials and McFarlane. For a Green Lantern comparison, here we have John Stewart. For a couple of McFarlane Wonder Women, here we have Last Night on Earth and the one designed by Todd McFarlane himself. Of course, for a New 52 Wonder Woman, we've got this one from DC Collectibles. But for some not-so-friendly people in Batman's life, here we have the Joker. These ones are from Rebirth and Mortal Kombat, and these two are from the Three Jokers. Copying my color scheme, I see. For a couple of other DC Multiverse Batman villains, here we have Deathstroke, and here we have Azrael. For a couple of Megafig comparisons, here we have Clayface, and here he is with the Joker Titan. This finally brings us to the Dark Knight himself. And just so I don't have to say it a bajillion times, any of these head swaps will require repainting. Starting off with a 6-inch scale Batman, and here we have DC Universe Classics. Here we have Batman from DC Icons. Here we have the DC Designer Series Grey Capullo version. The Capullo head's a bit too small and a bit too loose. Conversely, the Zur-En-Arrh head's a bit too big. That said, if you really wanted to, you could probably make it work. And here we have the DC Essentials Rebirth. Nice cape. The Rebirth head is too small and sits too high. The Zur-En-Arrh head is too big and sits too low. Moving on to McFarlane toys, and I have a surprise for you. Batman from Detective Comics 1000. Whenever I do a head swap video, you guys always ask for it, so here you go. Unfortunately, the pegs aren't a match, so this head sits a little bit high. Also, to my eye, it seems a bit small. That said, if you can give him a bit more of a neck, this wouldn't look that bad. At the very least, the head does seem to be better proportioned. Next up is Thomas Wayne as Flashpoint Batman. I really like this one. The facial structure more closely resembles the Three Jokers Batman, so if he's your Batman of choice, this looks like a more natural variation of this. On the flip side, this looks really cool too. The roughed up face seems more in line with his character, and since Flashpoint Batman is Thomas Wayne, it creates a visual distinction between the two different men. Here we have Dark Knight's Death Metal. This one is very similar to Flashpoint. It's also a more readily available figure, so if you like this look, that might be your better bet. Again, I really like the inverse. The roughed up texture on the skin and mask seem to fit the motif a lot better. Next we have the Battle Damage one, and speaking of necks, this one is unfortunately incompatible. And on that subject, here we have Batman from the Three Jokers. Unfortunately, he has the same kind of neck joint as the Battle Damage one, but moving on to a Batman whose head we can swap, here we have DC Rebirth. Shout out by the way to YouTube user Reda Amanta, who not only asked for a Zur-En-Arrh head swap video, but wanted to see a head swap of this figure in particular. A lot of people thought that the Rebirth head was too small, so in that case this might be a better fit for you. Personally, I think this one might be a bit too big. And if the Rebirth head is too small for the Rebirth body, you gotta know it's gonna be too small for this one. Next up is the Dark Knight Returns. Seeing this kinda makes me want Frank Miller to do a story with it. Seeing this, however, reminds me that Frank Miller's style really only works in a Frank Miller comic. Here we have Future State. This, of course, is Tim Fox. Future State Batman is one of my favorite figures for head swaps, and if you wanted to do a Bruce Wayne version of the character, I think this head would work. The other way around, however, not so much. As much as I love the Future State head, it simply does not fit the Zur-En-Arrh aesthetic. And finally, moving into live action, here we have Battinson. This head on this body looks absolutely fantastic. I swear the Battinson figure was worth it alone for head swap potential. At a distance, it kind of looks like a live action version of Arkham Knight. Conversely, I like this a lot more than I was expecting. Because of all the stitch work on the mask, it feels like it matches up to the stitch work of the body. And lastly, here we have Batfleck. The goggles and seams and straps do give this a homemade quality, but the head is so realistic in relation to the body that I don't really know if this would work. That said, this really works. The body has a lot of detail, but it's not so overly realistic that you can't use it for a good comic version. A couple of fists or maybe even a Batmite would have really set this over the top, but for everything we got, I am pretty impressed. And that, of course, is to say nothing about the potential for head swaps. For playability, I'm giving the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh 1 whole point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. Batman of Zur-En-Arrh is exclusive to Target and retails for $19.99. Considering that this is an all-new sculpt with limited reuse potential and 2 accessories, I'd say that's a pretty good value. And for customizers, this head sculpt is probably worth it all on its own. For price, I'm giving the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh 1 whole point for a grand total of 5 out of 5. To check out a couple of other Batman head swap videos, click here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.